Hello and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 20th April 2026, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be looking into the 7 set of current affairs issues which are featured in today's newspaper. The handout of this very discussion has been pinned in the comment section below for your future reference. Beginning with the analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try and understand a very perplexing situation when it comes to women participation in the labor force. As in the recent time, we have witnessed an increment in the female labor force participation rate, but at the same time, we are seeing very few women at the leadership roles. We'll try and understand this perplexing situation. Moving on to the second topic, herein we'll try and understand that why Sri Lanka is significant for India, what are the emerging challenges between the two countries, and how India can restore its strategic ties with one of its important neighbor. Moving on to the prelim pointer segment, herein we'll be covering the 5 set of current affairs issues which are more relevant from the prelims perspective. So, we'll be doing the value addition which would be helping you in the upcoming prelims examination. So, stay tuned. Now, beginning with the first topic, which is dealing with female labor force participation rate. Now, when it comes to Indian economy, what we are witnessing in the recent time is that female labor force participation rate has improved over a period of time. But at the same time, very few females are reaching to managerial positions or key leadership roles. This is referred as the phenomena of glass ceiling. Women continue to witness this phenomena of glass ceiling when it comes to the Indian society. This particular topic we can associate with GS paper 1, issues related to women, and at the same time you can also relate it with GS paper 3, issues relating to Indian economy, precisely employment. Now, firstly, we need to understand that what do we mean by female labor force participation rate? It simply tells us that how many females which are part of the labor force. Part of the labor force means that they are actually employed or they are actively seeking for employment, divided by the number of women who are in the working age. What is working age? 15 years to 59 years. So this is what is female labor force participation rate. And as you can see in this particular graph, that female labor force participation rate has improved over a period of time. From 33% in 2022, it is currently 40% in 2025, based on the usual status. That is, principal status means what you have been doing for the majority of the year. Subsidiary status is what you have been doing for the, less part of the year. But even today, the female labor force participation rate is still below the global average. Global average is 49%. And we are still below the emerging economies like Brazil and Vietnam, where the female labor force participation rate is quite high as compared to India. It is 53% in Brazil and it is 69% in Vietnam. Now, what is this phenomenon of glass ceiling? We understood this thing, that what is female labor force participation rate. Let's understand what is this glass ceiling. Glass ceiling simply tells us that beyond a particular position, women are not promoted. So there is an invisible glass ceiling beyond which women are not able to get promoted. So that is the reason you will see that very few females are becoming top CEO. They are becoming vice chancellors. Okay, so women are not provided with the key leadership roles. This is something that you can very well validate by the data point that I have mentioned. So if you look at the IIT, therein the proportion of female faculty is stagnant at around 14% of the total strength. Then when you talk about the annual survey of unincorporated sector enterprise, female owned enterprises are roughly 27% in 2025. Then if you go by periodic labor force survey, it points out that out of every 100 males which are working as legislators, senior officials, managers in 2025, we have only 13 females at these higher positions. And when you talk about the corporate houses, therein 77% of the corporate houses, when it comes to their board of director, they have only 1 or 2 women as directors, because this is something mandatory which has been imposed on the top listed companies by the SEBI. Otherwise, they would not have kept even this 1 or 2 women directors also. So this is the scenario when it comes to the women participation in the labor force. Now, firstly, let's understand that what are the factors which determine that whether the female would be becoming a part of the labor force or not. First is the supply side factors, that whether a female is able to avail herself to be a part of the labor force or not. First factor is the gross enrollment ratio, especially at the higher education. So in the recent time, what we have witnessed is that the gross enrollment ratio at the higher education, therein women are getting enrolled as compared to the male. Okay, so gross enrollment ratio when it comes to the female is higher as compared to the male. This simply points to the fact that now women would not be ready to do menial jobs in the informal sector. So since they have attained higher education, they'll be now looking for formal jobs. Then another factor is time poverty. Time poverty is how much time I am left with for my personal growth. When you look at the time use survey, which is carried out by National Statistics Office, women end up spending 8 times more time on the unpaid care work or the household work as compared to the men. So that simply points to the fact that females are left with less amount of time which they can actually use to do personal growth. Another factor is socio-economic factors. Now, normally we think that it is only the patriarchal norms which are going to decide that whether females would be becoming a part of the labor force or not. But you will be surprised to know that when it comes to the rural India, wherein we have rigid patriarchal norms, therein you have a higher female labor force participation rate as compared to the urban areas. Why do you think this is the scenario? Because which factor is going to dominate, whether it is the family income or the patriarchal norms? It would be decided on this particular fact that what is the income earned by a family. So if you look at the rural areas, therein the income of the families are quite less. So that is the reason here it would be the income factor which would dominate over the patriarchal norms. So that is the reason you will see, to increase the family income, female would be allowed to be a part of the labor force. But when it comes to urban areas where you don't see that rigid patriarchal norms, but at the same time in the urban areas, you will notice this particular fact that the family incomes are high, and that is the reason it is the patriarchal mindset which would dominate over the income factor. So since the family income is enough, so patriarchal mindset would prevent women from being a part of the labor force. And that is the reason this explains this perpetual situation, that why when it comes to urban areas, you have a higher female participation rate as compared to the urban areas. Now, demand side factors. Demand side factors is why companies are not incentivized to hire female employees. First is the inflexible labor laws. So when you talk about the Factories Act, it does not allow women to work in the night shift. But now in the recent labor laws, labor codes, we have made the changes. We have allowed the women to work in the night shift. But previously this was the scenario under the Factories Act that women were not allowed to work in the night shift. So that was the reason the factories were not incentivized to hire female employees. Another factor is lack of adequate employment opportunity. So one of the major employer, that is the textile sector. But when it comes to textile sector, we are not doing that much great. Rather, we are facing a very stiff competition from Bangladesh. And you must have read this in the newspaper that when US enforced the reciprocal tariff, that negatively impacted the textile sector in India. Then, when you talk about the gig economy also, in the gig economy, have you seen a lot of female auto drivers, a lot of female delivery personals? The answer is no. Even in the gig economy, you will see females doing the care work, what we refer to be as pink jobs. For example, working as beauticians. So, because of the gig economy also and the gender biasness that you see in the gig economy also, that is another reason why female employees are not preferred by the institutions or the corporate houses. Another major factor is motherhood penalty. What is this motherhood penalty? Once a female becomes a mother, the corporation starts thinking that now the first priority for this female employee would be her child or her family. So because she has to give due attention to the child, she will not be able to do due justice when it comes to the professional roles. And that is the reason women are not promoted beyond a particular level. And they also have to provide maternity benefits. That is another reason why especially the private institutions are not incentivized to provide, employment opportunities to female. And adding up to that, Another demand that has come up is menstrual leaves. So these are the prominent factors which determine that whether female would be a part of the labor force or not. Now, why in the recent times we have witnessed an improvement in the female labor force participation rate? Let's understand the factors. First is the improved methodology. So when it comes to periodic labor force survey, earlier we do not used to take into account the woman who was providing, unpaid service to family businesses. But now when it comes to periodic labor force survey, we will be calculating the females who are working as unpaid helpers in the family business. That is one factor which has led to an improvement in the female labor force participation rate. Another factor is increasing feminization of agriculture. So nowadays when it comes to India, 1/3 of the farmers are basically females. But is it because we have improved the condition of women, or is it because of women empowerment? The answer is no. It is simply because of the fact that we have witnessed rural to urban migration of the males, and that is the reason when it comes to agriculture related work that has to be taken up by the females. Then there is reduction in the time poverty. Now this is something good, because in the recent time the government has adopted the welfare approach, and it has actually went into this direction of universalization of basic services. That has helped us to reduce the time poverty. You will be thinking, how, ma'am? Think of Jal Jeevan Mission. We are providing tap water in the household. So that would reduce the time which the woman has to, put when it comes to fetching potable drinking water for her family. Then under the Ujjwala scheme, we are providing LPG gas connections. So that is again going to reduce the time which the woman used to put in when it comes to getting the wood from the forest area to use it as a fuel wood. So that is how, by universalization of the basic services, by putting in place crèche facilities and all, we are trying to ensure that woman is having enough time so that she can use that particular time for her own personal growth. Then after COVID-19 pandemic, we all know that there was a reduction in the family incomes. And I told you which factor would dominate would be depending on this particular fact, that whether the family has enough income or not. So after COVID-19 pandemic, since the family income went down, it was the income factor which started dominating the patriarchal norms. And that is the reason you witness an increase in the participation of the female in the labor force. Then the recent changes in the labor laws, as I told you, under the new labor codes, we have allowed the females to work even in the night shift. But at the same time, we have stated that it is the organization which has to ensure the safety of that female employee as well. And there are certain states like Rajasthan, Odisha and Karnataka, before the labor code came into picture, these states actually allowed the women to work in the night shift. Then when it comes to gig economy, this is enabling the females to effectively manage their household responsibility with the professional roles. And that is the reason the gig economy has also led to an increase in the participation of the female in the labor force. Last factor is the proactive government policies, that is Maternity Benefit Act, wherein we are providing crèche facility, Anganwadi centers, so the females can leave their little toddlers in the Anganwadi center and they can do their work. Then to protect the dignity of the woman at the workplace, we have come up with the protection of sexual harassment of women at the workplace. So these are the proactive policies which have led to an improvement in the female labor force participation rate. But let's look at the other side of the coin. Why still we have very few females at the key leadership roles? Why women in India continue to witness this glass ceiling? Let's explore the reasons. First and foremost is India half-hearted approach. I told you that more than 70% of the corporate houses, when it comes to their board of directors, they have 1 or 2 women working as directors. And why they have actually employed 1 or 2 women director? It is because SEBI under the Companies Act has made it mandatory for the companies that they have to employ 1 woman as a part of the board of directors. And this was the condition which was for the top 1000 listed company. And they have just followed this mandatory provisions. They have not ensured that more females become a part of the board of directors. Okay, so they have considered this mandate of 1 woman director as the maximum number of women that should be part of the board of directors. Another reason is pink jobs. Because of the how we are treated at the, when we are child. That is the reason we think that women are more suited for care roles. And that is the reason we prefer seeing women in pink jobs only. And this is the reason you will see that even in the gig economy, I told you, women are majorly coming up not as auto drivers, not as delivery persons, but they are coming as beauticians. And this is the same scenario when it comes to defense also. That is the reason we are not allowing women to enter into the defense role, okay, which is not a care role. Then motherhood penalty. I told you, as in when a woman becomes a mother, the institutions start thinking that now her sole priority, the first priority would be the child and the family, and she'll not be able to do due justice to the professional roles. And that is the reason, beyond a particular point, woman is not promoted. And this is something which is common once a woman becomes a mother. Then there is pipeline leakage problem. Now, if I have to promote a woman, I need to have women at the mid level also. But because we have very few women in the mid management position, why females usually do mid career dropout? Because of the inflexible laws that we have. We don't have paid maternity paternity leaves. Then there is not adequate infrastructure in place. You will not be providing promotion to the woman. Ultimately, the woman would be leaving that particular entity. And that is the reason you witness very few women are there at the middle management position. So when you have very few women at the middle management position, how you will be able to ensure that more women are reaching to the top leadership roles? Then there is limited networking opportunities. Now, when it comes to the corporate entities, majorly they are male dominated, and if you want to get promotion, you need to have better connections, better networking. Because it is dominated by the males, it becomes very difficult for the woman to develop that kind of network and get business for her company, and that is the reason women are not promoted beyond a particular point. Now, another dimension that we need to understand is why there is a need to increase female labor force participation rate. First and foremost, to realize this goal of developed economy by 2047. So according to a paper released by World Bank in 2023, it clearly pointed out that if India wants to realize its goal of developed economy by 2047, it needs to grow at a rate of nearly 8% every year. And this is not possible without increasing the female labor force participation rate. Then we need to improve the female labor force participation rate, and we need to bring it in parity with the male labor force participation rate in order to realize this goal of developed economy by 2047, and in order to effectively reap the gender dividend. Currently, when you talk about the females, they account for 49% of India's population. But if you look at their contribution to the output, it is merely 18%. So to effectively reap this gender dividend, we need to improve the labor force participation rate of the females. And what we have witnessed is, for example, in areas like Tirupur, which is situated in Tamil Nadu, and it is considered to be as the knitwear capital of India. Therein, the textile sector is doing very well. So here we have witnessed higher female labor force participation rate, and that is one of the prominent factor that why you have good human development indicators here. So if you want to realize the goal of inclusive growth also, you also need to improve the female labor force participation rate. Then, why do we need to break this glass ceiling? Why we need to have more females at the leadership role? First and foremost is to ensure that the company grows at a higher rate. This has been validated by a study carried out by Boston Consulting Group that the companies which have more female at the leadership role, they witness higher revenue because there is more innovation in that particular company. Then the investors and the consumers would show more confidence in that particular company, because if you have higher women at the leadership roles, this would enable the company to have a better ESG ratings, that is environmental, social and governance rating. Then it would create inclusive work culture, because if you have females at the leadership role, they'll be talking about the rights when it comes to the other female employees. For example, paid maternity leaves should be effectively implemented, paid menstrual leave should be there, effective paternal leave should be there, Okay, flexible work hours should be there so that she can effectively manage the professional roles plus the household responsibility. So that is possible only when you have more females at the leadership roles. And lastly, this is needed to meet the sustainable development goals also. This would not just enable us to meet one sustainable development goal, but you can see that it would enable us to meet multiple sustainable development goals. Sustainable goal number 5, which talks about gender equality, 8, decent work and economic growth, and 10 also, which would enable us to reduce inequality as well. Because as highlighted by the World Inequality Lab, males are earning 82% of the income, whereas females are earning only 18% of the income. So we need to address this inequality level or the gender pay gap. Now, how do you address this particular situation? First and foremost, we need to monetize the care economy. For that, we need to implement the ILO's 5R approach. First R stands for recognizing that females are doing unpaid care burden work. And how do you recognize that? By carrying out time use survey on a regular basis, so that we can get to know that what is the time poverty actually faced by the woman. Because until and unless you do not measure something, you will not be able to address that particular phenomena. Second is that we need to reduce the burden of unpaid care burden work when it comes to female. And how do the government reduce this? By adopting the new welfare approach and by ensuring universalization of the basic services. Okay, like for example, providing functional tap water under the Jal Jeevan mission, providing LPG cylinders, etc. So that is how we can reduce the time poverty faced by women. Then we need to redistribute this care burden. So NGOs should come forward, government should come forward, and private sector should come forward. We should put in place crèche facility. We should create more old age homes. Okay, that's how we'll be able to fairly distribute this care burden among the different players. Then you need to reward. So the government should provide direct benefit transfer to the females, and by using that money, the woman can hire domestic helps. So if I hire a domestic help, I am also providing money to that domestic helper for the care work for which she is not getting any money at her home. So that leads to monetization of the care economy. And since I am able to get the support of the domestic helper, I would be able to be a part of the labor force. Then lastly, we need to ensure adequate representations of the female. How do you do that? By ensuring that the gender pay gap is reduced, by ensuring effective implementation of Maternity Benefit Act and the POSH Act, etc. Lastly, how can we ensure that more and more females are able to break the glass ceiling and they get to the key leadership roles? Firstly, we should follow the international global practice, which is something which is followed in Norway and Italy, wherein they have put in place mandatory boardroom quotas, that 40% of the members of board of directors should be women, and in case of Italy it is 30%. So this is something that we can apply in case of India as well. Then there should be mandatory diversity disclosure. This is something which is followed in UK, wherein the listed companies have to disclose with the government that how and what all strategies they are going to apply in order to improve that there is gender diversity at the workplace. Then we need to create gender responsive policies. For example, we need to realize this idea of paid paternal leaves, because taking care of the child is not solely the responsibility of the mother, it is also to be equally shared with the father as well. For that, we need to realize the paid paternal leaves as well. Then we need to invest in the crèche facility. We need to provide leadership training and mentorship to the females who are at the mid-managerial position, so that by getting that training and capacity building, we can ensure that the females which are at the mid-managerial position, they can reach to top leadership roles. And lastly, we should incentivize the companies. So if a company is ensuring gender diversity, the government should provide some sort of tax benefits to that particular company. That's how we will be able to ensure that the glass ceiling is broken and there is gender diversity at the workplace. That's all that we have to look into when it comes to this particular topic. Based on the discussion that we have, I have framed a practice question for you people, so do practice this particular question. And with this, let's move on to the second topic. Now, recently, the India's Vice President, that is C.P. Radhakrishnan, is on a 2-day visit to Sri Lanka. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, India and its neighborhood relation. So in this backdrop, let's just understand that how India-Sri Lanka relations have evolved over a period of time. So when it comes to India and Sri Lanka, we share cultural ties right from the time of Emperor Ashoka because of Buddhism. So this is one of the common cultural links between Sri Lanka and India. Then Sri Lanka witnessed civil war in 1980s, and this involved the liberation tigers of Tamil Elam. Then we have Indo-Sri Lanka Accord in 1987, wherein this accord aimed to provide regional autonomy to the Tamil areas, and India deployed Indian peacekeeping forces so that the peace could be restored. But there was severe backlash for this particular decision of India, that we are intervening in some others' country internal matters, and ultimately India withdrew from it in 1990. And after the end of the civil war in 2009, since then India has been one of the important economic player when it comes to Sri Lanka. Now, why Sri Lanka is significant for India? First and foremost is its strategic location. You see the important sea lines of communication. State of Malacca is passing just nearby the Hambantota port of Sri Lanka. So because of its strategic location, it becomes significant for India's maritime interest. Then for maritime security also, as we discussed right now, that how Hambantota port is quite close to this important sea lines of communication through which world's oil and container transportation is happening. And China has got the hold of this Hambantota port, and that is the reason to ensure that we don't see rising Chinese footprint in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka is important for India to address the China angle and to secure this important sea lines of communication. Now, what are the areas of convergence between the two countries? When it comes to trade and commerce, we are doing good. We have the free trade agreement with the Sri Lanka, which came into force in 2000, and India is one of Sri Lanka's top trading partner among the SAARC countries. India is also an important contributor of FDI to Sri Lanka. This has been validated by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka also. Then, when it comes to tourism and connectivity, there also we are converging because India is one of the leading sources of tourists for Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka has recently adopted India's UPI framework. So that points out the convergence when it comes to fintech connectivity. Then, India is providing developmental cooperation to Sri Lanka. India funded housing projects and programs under the 450 million package which was extended to Sri Lanka after Cyclone Ditwa, so that it can recover easily. Then we have opened credit lines and we provided $400 million currency swap agreement as well. Then India was the first country which provided a letter of support for Sri Lanka's debt restructuring, and ultimately it got the bailout package from the IMF. So we were the first who supported this particular thing. India is also providing humanitarian assistance to Sri Lanka. This was something that we can see during the COVID-19 pandemic. The two countries are also collaborating when it comes to the maritime security. We have joint exercises like SLINEX, which is a naval exercise, and we also have joint military exercise, which is Mitra Shakti. Then the two countries are collaborating when it comes to coastal surveillance. So Sri Lankan coastal surveillance radars are being integrated with International Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean, which is situated at Gurugram in India. We are also seeing increasing cooperation in the energy security area. India has signed an agreement that we will be developing these Trincomalee oil tank farm, and Sri Lanka recently cancelled a Chinese company's license to build 3 solar and wind hybrid power generation facility. You can see here. Now, what are the areas of concerns which are emerging between the two countries? First and foremost bone of contention is rising Chinese footprint. As I told you, China has got lease of Hambantota port for 99 years, and a Chinese company got the lease for 99 years of Hambantota port in 2017. And we discussed right now that how Hambantota port is quite close to the important sea lines of communication. China has also said Sri Lanka and China have entered into an agreement that China would be developing airport at its Sri Lanka's capital, that is Colombo. Recently, we have witnessed that Chinese vessels like Yuang Wang 5, they are conducting data collection activities in the Indian Ocean. And why this deteriorated India-Sri Lanka relations? Because this Chinese vessel which India thinks would be used for future military operations against India, because whatever data it is collecting. This vessel was docked at the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, and this deteriorated India-Sri Lanka relations. Then we have fishing disputes. It is majorly because of the Katchivu Island. Although India and Sri Lanka signed an agreement in 1974, within which we gave the Katchivu Island to Sri Lanka, but there are differing interpretation when it comes to India side and when it comes to Sri Lanka side. India thinks that under this particular agreement, the Indian fishermen still have the right to do rest, net drying, and they can still visit the annual St. Anthony's festival without the need of visa. But Sri Lanka denies all these facility to Indian fishermen, and that is the reason we have fishing disputes. And when it comes to Katchivu Island, you can see it is situated near the Mannar Island. Another problem is ethnic reconciliation. So, Sri Lanka is not effectively implementing the 13th Amendment to its constitution, which was enacted following the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord in 1987. This accord stated that more autonomy should be provided to the provincial council, especially in the Tamil majority areas. But the Sinhala community think that it is an interference from India's side, and they oppose this greater devolution of autonomy to Tamil majority areas, whereas the Tamil groups continue to demand broader provincial autonomy. And this has placed India at a very difficult diplomatic position, because Tamil Nadu basically supports the interest of the Tamil minorities in the Sri Lankas also. Then, recently, Adani Group backed out of an energy agreement that it has signed with Sri Lanka. Okay, so it withdrew from a controversial 442 million renewable energy project which was to be come up in the northern Sri Lanka. Why? Because when this project was given approval, from that time also there were various concerns with regard to following a transparent bid system, because the opposition raised this concern that a transparent bidding system was not followed, and there were various environmental concerns also that were raised. So because of this thing, opposition from the locals and the concerns with respect to its approval following a transparent bidding process and potential environmental impact, because of this backlash, Adani Group actually withdrew from this particular agreement. So these are the emerging areas of concern between the two countries. Now, how India can restore its relation with one of its important regional players, because we understood that how much important Sri Lanka is for India's maritime as well as the trade interest. First and foremost, we need to ensure effective implementation of the 5S approach. What is this 5S approach? We need to respect each other. We need to have effective dialogue, samvad, sahyog, cooperate on whatever areas we can, ensure cooperation. There should be promotion of peace in the region. So if Sri Lanka thinks that China is going to use any vessel or any port which is going to go against the interest of India, it should take necessary action, because both countries should promote peace in this Indian Ocean region. And both should work together so that there could be samriddhi or prosperity. We need to have constructive engagement, dialogue with Sri Lanka, especially when it comes to resolving the fisherman dispute. We need to look this from a humanitarian angle, because it's not like Indian fishermen's livelihood is getting impacted, Sri Lankan fishermen's livelihood is also getting impacted. Okay, recently as Sri Lanka released 47 Indian fishermen, like this, based on constructive dialogue, we should release the fishermen of each side. Then India should make use of its soft power and cultural diplomacy. So we can collaborate with Sri Lanka when it comes to strengthening the Buddhist link. So we can collaborate with Sri Lanka when it comes to putting in place Buddhist circuit, Ramayana trail, etc. We can collaborate when it comes to the fintech sector, and other areas of cooperation should also be explored. And recently, as when the Indian Vice President was on a 2-day visit, he has announced that the Overseas Citizen of India card would be available, would be extended to 6th generation of Indian origin Sri Lankans. This OCI card basically gives the facility of lifelong, visa-free entry to India. So this is something we have extended to 6th generation Indian origin Sri Lankans also. So we should work upon increasing this people to people ties, and we should explore the cultural diplomacy angle as well. Then we should ensure effective utilization of the institution where these two countries are collaborating with each other. This could be BIMSTEC, this could be Indian Ocean Rim Association, and the both countries should work with each other when it comes to ensuring regional maritime security. Other areas they can collaborate, that is climate change, and both countries should try to integrate at the economic front as well. And we should operate within the established framework. What is India's framework? That is neighborhood first policy, which was recently appreciated by the Sri Lankan president also. And we have Sagar initiative, that is security and growth for all in the region. India's approach towards Sri Lanka should be guided by this, and India should try to strengthen its economic and trade relation with Sri Lanka, because we know this thing that if you have better economic connection with any country, that country would not even think of taking any action which would be going against India's interests. So that is something we need to work upon. That's all when it comes to this particular topic. I have framed a practice question for you people based on the discussion that we have. Please try and attempt this particular question. With this, let's move on to the prelim pointer segment. Now, recently, Lenskart has apologized because some document was prevailing in the online platform, which earlier stated that Lenskart prevent its employee from showcasing the religious symbols, okay, or symbols of faith. For example, bindi, tilak, sindoor, mangal sutra, hijab and turban. But now Lenskart has apologized for this thing, and it has said that we have a new in-store style guide which would allow the employees to wear religious and cultural symbols even at work. Okay, so now the employees of Lenskart can showcase these symbols of faith. And it has clarified that the document which was going viral, it is an outdated document. This particular topic you can associate with the polity segment of a prelim syllabus. Now, what is important for us to know from the exam point of view is how Indian model of secularism is different from Western model of secularism. Now, when it comes to Indian model of secularism, the preamble clearly states that we are a secular state. That means there is no official state religion, and Indian state is supposed to maintain neutrality and equal distance from all the religion. We are guided by dharma nirpekshta, okay, and equal respect for all the religion. And that is the reason when it comes to fundamental rights, we have constitutional article 25 to 28 which talks about religious freedoms also. When it comes to the Indian model of secularism, it is based on the idea of principal distance. That means the government would maintain an equidistance from all the religion, equal respect for all the religion. But it does not state that India government cannot bring religious reforms. Okay, in the Indian model of secularism, state-led religious reforms are allowed. For example, we banned triple talaq, we banned untouchability. But when you talk about the Western model, they follow strict neutrality. The state is not allowed to interfere in the activities of religion institutions. And that is the reason in Western model, you don't have this idea of state-led religious reforms. When it comes to India, state can oversee religious affairs through Waqf board, temple management committee, etc. But when it comes to the Western model, this is not at all allowed because they go by the idea of strict separation between the state and the religion. But this is strict separation is not followed in the Indian model of secularism. Then when it comes to religious expression, with the help of Lenskart example also, you can understand that when it comes to India, the people are allowed to permit religious symbols even in the public domain. Even at work, if there is a Sikh, he can wear a turban. If somebody is belonging to Muslim community, they can wear hijab. Okay, so showcasing religious symbol in the public places is allowed. But this is not at all allowed in the Western model of secularism. And we also have the religious official holidays on Eid, Diwali, Holi, Christmas, etc. But when you talk about the Western model, they have a secular calendar and they ban religious symbol in the public institutions. Then, when you talk about the legal system, in Indian model of secularism, we have separate personal laws for different religious community. We are still not guided by the Uniform Civil Code. This is something which is followed in the Western model of secularism. What is Uniform Civil Code? Which clearly states that there should be, same personal laws for all the religion. Okay, so irrespective of the fact that which religion you belong to, same set of personal laws would be applicable to all the religions. And this is something that we see in the Western model of secularism. Lastly, when it comes to the Indian model of secularism, we have the idea of minority rights. This is something that you can see in Article 30, wherein the minorities have the right that they can establish and they can at the same time administer educational institutions. And the state can also provide funding support to such minority institutions also. But there is no such concept in the Western model of secularism. And when it comes to Article 28, in educational institutions that are not wholly maintained by the state funds, therein religious instructions are allowed. But in this scenario also, the institution needs to take the consent from the guardians also. But when it comes to the Western model of secularism, they follow a strictly secular public education. No religious instructions are allowed when it comes to Western model of secularism. So that is all when it comes to Indian model as well as Western model of secularism. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, various AI companies have come up with a collaborative approach and they have come up with the project Glasswing. Let's understand what is this project Glasswing. This particular topic you can associate with the science and tech section of your prelim syllabus. Now, what is this project Glasswing? This is a collaborative cyber security initiative which is led by Anthropic. And this initiative, you have the collaboration of different AI companies like Amazon Web Service, Apple, Broadcom, Cisco, okay, JP Morgan, etc., which control critical infrastructure. These are the companies which have critical infrastructure and these are the major AI companies also. And why they have come up with this particular project? The aim is to protect the critical global software infrastructure by using an AI model that is Cloud-A Mythos Preview. What this AI model is going to do? It is going to automatically detect or discover zero-day vulnerability, which is very difficult for the humans to find out. What is this zero-day vulnerability? Zero-day vulnerability is a flaw in the software that nobody could witness until it was spotted. Okay, until some glitch happened, till then nobody was able to spot it. And this gives developer very less time, 0 day to fix it. For example, WannaCry attack in 2017. So the attackers, they'll find some glitch in the software code and by using that, they will develop an actual weapon built on that flaw to attack on that particular software, which is basically a piece of code that lets an attacker break into a system, steal data and crash the critical services. So we don't witness this thing when it comes to the critical global software infrastructure. For that, this project has been launched, wherein we are going to use this AI tool that is Cloud-A Mythos Preview, which would be effective in figuring out the zero-day vulnerability, and it would automatically, without any human interference, it would be able to generate the code to fix that flaw also. Now let's understand how it is going to work. So when it comes to the traditional security scanners, they follow a very rigid pattern. They'll go step by step. But when it comes to this Cloud-A Mythos, it does not require any human intervention. It would be automatically, autonomously, it would be able to figure out the zero-day vulnerability. Okay, it would read the code within a fraction of seconds. It would simulate exploit. Okay, it would figure out that what is the flaw in this security code, and it would generate a code also to fix that flaw also. Okay, so that we don't witness zero-day vulnerability in future. Okay, identify thousands of bugs across different platforms with minimal human supervision, operating at roughly 10 times the speed of previous automated tools. So it is quite fast and it is very less, costly also. For example, recently it has been pointed out that this Cloud-A Mythos has been able to find out flaws in 27-year-old operating system, that is OpenBSD, and it has been also been able to find out the flaws in 16-year-old video processing library, that is FFmpeg. So it clearly points out, these two examples clearly points out that when it comes to this Cloud-A Mythos, it does has the ability to figure out the zero-day vulnerability, and it is able to do it without human intervention or supervision. It is able to generate the code also to fix it within fraction of second, and these two examples prove this fact. But what is the concern when it comes to this particular project, which was highlighted in today's article? The concern is, under this project Glasswing, the companies which are collaborating, they have said that this technology would be available to a closed group of people or closed companies. This is going to concentrate the cybersecurity power in the hand of few firms only. And what would be the implication? The rest of the world, when it comes to securing their software infrastructure, they would be dependent upon these firms. And since only handful of the firms do have access to this cloud mythos, they could charge an exorbitant price on us when it comes to securing the digital software infrastructure. That's all that we need to know when it comes to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, we have made a great advancement when it comes to the semiconductor supply chain. Odisha has come up with India's first 3D chip packaging plant, and it has come up in Bhubaneswar. This particular topic you can associate with science and tech section of your prelim syllabus. Now, what is this advanced semiconductor packaging? So, it is basically a collection of manufacturing processes wherein we combine multiple semiconductor chips into a single electronic package. This increases the capability and reduces the power consumption and the cost. Now, when I talk about the 3D mechanism, okay, three-dimensional integrated circuits, as you can see here. So, here, when it comes to the semiconductor chips, they would be stacked vertically, as you can see, dice 1, dice 2, okay. So, there will be vertical stacking of multiple chips. Whereas, when you look at the 3.2 version, there is consider this to be a plot of land and there is no vertical stacking. So, this requires more space for putting in place the semiconductor chips. Whereas, when it comes to the three-dimensional integrated circuits, as we are going with this vertical stacking of multiple chips instead of spread out flat on a single layer like this 2.5 version. So, this enables that these chips are connected with very fine vertical wires called thorosilicon vias, and this allows chips, since they are vertically stacked on each other, this allows the chips to communicate faster and they will be using less power also as compared to this 2.5 stacking. Okay, so the distance is more, so they will take more time to communicate with each other and they would be using more power as compared to the three-dimensional integrated circuits. Now, what is the benefit of this three-dimensional integrated circuits? The benefit is that since the chips are located quite close to each other, they will be able to communicate fast. So, there would be better performance, there would be less power consumption because of the efficient connections, and we will be able to come up with a compact size. Okay, this you can understand like this. You have a piece of land. So, if you start placing it side by side, the chips like this, you will need more piece of land. But if I have this much area and I build a multi-story building, I would require less space. So, this is the idea that we are trying to implement in the 3D stack. Okay. So, because of this compact size, it would be a great advancement, especially when it comes to the semiconductor supply chain, because this would be used in phones and AI chips. So, that's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently we have witnessed an improvement in the CSR spending done by the listed companies in India. This particular topic you can associate with the economy section of your prelims syllabus. Now, companies are no longer just chasing profits, they are also doing CSR expenditure also. And this expenditure is largely being done by the companies which are listed on the stock exchange. Why they have been able to do huge CSR expenditure? It is because they have been making profits also. There has been 22% growth in the average net profits of these companies. But when you talk about sector-wise allocation of CSR expenditure, majority has been given to education, then the second one is healthcare, but minimal CSR expenditure is being done on areas like slum development, support for armed force veterans and the disaster management. And good part is, we have seen that 98% of the firms which are supposed to do the CSR expenditure, they have done it in this particular year. Now, let's understand certain prelim pointers with respect to the corporate social responsibility. Now, it aims to integrate social and environmental consideration when it comes to the business operations, so that the corporate houses are not just focusing upon making profits. They also contribute to environmental cause. They also help in reducing the inequality and the socioeconomic parameters. So, this framework was put in place in India under the section 135 of the Companies Act of 2013, and it came into effect in April 2014, which mandates that certain eligible companies, what are these eligible companies, we'll try and understand, they have to contribute towards the societal development. So they should not just focus upon the profit element, they should also take into account the socio-economic development of the country. Through the CSR expenditure, we are trying to ensure that corporate entities are also helping in realization of inclusive growth as well. Now, which are these eligible companies? So, this Section 135 of the Companies Act says that the companies will have to make CSR expenditure which meet these following criteria. They have a net worth of 500 crore or more, an annual turnover of 1000 crore or more, or a net profit of 5 crore or more, okay, in the previous financial years. And what is the minimum CSR expenditure that they have to do? So they have to allocate at least 2% of their average net profit in the previous three, whatever net profit they have made in the previous 3 financial years towards the CSR activity. And earlier, before the 2019 amendment, if let's suppose company kept out some CSR fund but they were not able to use it effectively, so that unspent CSR fund used to be carried forward in the next financial year also. But after this amendment, what has happened, if the company failed to utilize this CSR fund, then this amount needs to be transferred to a specialized Schedule 7th fund by the end of the fiscal year, and this money needs to be utilized within 3 years. And if the company failed to utilize this money even after these 3 years, then this money would be deposited in the government specified fund, okay, like for example PM relief fund, etc. One last fact that we need to know with respect to corporate social responsibility is, if the company is utilizing the money which is going to improve the welfare of its own employees, such expenditure cannot be categorized as CSR expenditure. Okay, so based on whatever we have discussed, I know that you will be able to attempt this particular PYQ which has been asked by UPSC in 2024. With this, let's move on to the last topic of today's analyst. Now, we all know that the workers are protesting on the streets. The article today points out that, what do you think? It is a law and order problem, or it is a concern related to dignity of the workers? This particular topic you can again associate with the economy section of your prelim syllabus. Now, according to various experts, why the workers have come to the streets from Manesar to Bhiwandi? Why the workers are on the streets? Because if a worker is earning 10,000 rupees in a month, do you think it is a living wage? It is not a living wage, it is not even a minimum wage. Rather, the expert says that it is a starvation wage. What is starvation wage? Wherein the compensation that you are providing to a worker is not sufficient even to meet the basic necessities of human life, that is food, clothing and shelter. Now, before we delve into this particular piece of article, let's just understand what do I mean by minimum wage, fair wage and living wage. When it comes to the minimum wage, it is the lowest legally allowed wage which the government would be fixing under the Minimum Wages Act. When it comes to fair wage, it somewhere lies between the minimum wage and the living wage. When it comes to living wage, this ensures that a worker is provided enough remuneration that he is able to attain a decent standard of living. And how do you define this decent standard of living? That would vary from the society to society. You have to look into the cost of living in a particular region. Based on that, you have to decide this living wage. Okay. It's not like the living wage would be same for all the regions. You have to look into the standard of living. You have to take into account the cost of living in a particular region, and then based on that, you have to determine what would be the living wage. And any wage which comes between the lowest legally mandated wage and a wage which enables the worker to meet a decent standard of living, that would be fair wage. Now, minimum wage, what is the purpose? To prevent exploitation of the workers. Fair wage, to ensure equitable share to the workers in the economic progress because they are also contributing to GDP growth rate. Living wage is to ensure that the workers also have a decent standard of living. When it comes to minimum wage, this is to be determined by the government. When it comes to fair wage, it is to be determined by the industry. And on what parameters they'll be deciding this? Based on the industry capacity to pay plus the productivity of the worker, the skill set of the worker. Living wage, herein you need to take into account the cost of living in a particular area. And obviously the capacity to pay, productivity, all those parameters would be taken into account. But the major factor that you have to consider is the cost of living in a particular area. Then, minimum wage. is sufficient only to meet the bare necessities of human life, food, clothing and shelter. Fair wage, they give a moderate standard of living. When it comes to living wage, it helps a worker not just to meet the basic necessities of human life, that is food, clothing and shelter. It also enables a worker to meet the education related expenses as well as medical related expenses. Okay, so a decent standard of living. When it comes to minimum wage, it is to be set by the government and it can vary from state as well as sector to sector. When it comes to fair wage, it is also flexible. It varies with the industry conditions, because one of the factors that we have to consider is the industry capacity to pay. And when it comes to living wage, currently it is considered to be as the ideal concept. Although the Indian constitutional article 43 talks about giving living wage to the people. But even today, this idea is not effectively implemented. Okay. So when it comes to minimum wage, the focus is to ensure survival of the workers, fair wage to provide fair remuneration to the workers, and living wage ensures that a worker is able to live a dignified life. Now coming back to the article, why do you think the workers have come on the street? First reason, which the article points out, that despite India being the 6th largest economy, which is witnessing 6 to 7% of growth rate, what we are seeing is there is constantly breach of statutory minimum wage norms also. In Rajasthan, wages have not been, revised for the last 3 years. It has remained stagnant. In 2019, the Anup Satpathy committee has recommended a floor wage of 375 rupees per day at 2018 prices and a monthly housing allowance for the urban workers, which is yet not implemented. And this is for the first time that we have seen that Manrega wages are not revised, thanks to the VBG Gramji scheme, wherein under the scheme we have a 60-day blackout period during the harvesting season or the sowing season. Okay, so that we can ensure adequate availability of the labor for the agriculture purpose. But you also need to understand that the 60-day blackout period is also going to undermine the bargaining power of the workers. They will not be able to negotiate a fair wage for themselves. Again, this is promoting the capitalist interest. That is what the article says. Okay, and as I told you, for the first time in the 15 years, Manrega wages have not been revised. Second problem is the 8 hours working day. This is not effectively implemented. Corporate houses are forcing the workers to work beyond this 8 hours. You must have heard about the hustle culture, wherein people are forced to meet, unreasonable targets, and this is common in the sales department. So hustle culture is on a rise. People are being forced to work for beyond 8 hours, and this is something that we are witnessing in Silicon Valley also. And the worst part is, workers are made to work beyond their working hours, but for that they are not paid overtime wages also. The last reason, according to the article, for this labor unrest is the labor codes. Because in the labor codes, we have tried to weaken the trade union as well. In the labor codes, it has been clearly stated that only that trade union would be considered to be as a negotiating trade union, which have the membership of 50% of the workers working in that entity. And what we have seen in the Noida unrest also, that the state government tried to weaken the trade union by putting the union leaders behind the bars. So this is like weakening the voice of the trade unions as well, which have acted as a safety wall still now when it comes to raising the voices of the labor class. And when you talk about the gig economy, we all know that how workers are exploited here. There are shorter delivery times, dwindling pays, and no effective grievance redressal put into place. And we all know gig economy is on a rise. And that is another reason why we are seeing increased exploitation of the workers. And the last triggering factor is the increase in the price of the gas cylinders, because when it comes to the affluent sections, they could make a switch to induction stoves. But what about the workers who are hardly earning 10,000 a month in Delhi NCR region, which is not even a minimum wage? It is not enabling the workers to meet a decent standard of living. That is the reason the article fairly concludes this thing, that the labor unrest is a systematic flaw. It is a cry for dignity. It is not a law and order problem. So you need to take into account the interest of the working class as well. and you need to give effect to the living wage. Previously also India has made this stance very clear that we'll be making a transition to living wage. This is the time, right time, that you need to implement that particular thing by taking the help from the ILO in this respect. That's all that we have to learn in today's Analyst. Quiz would be coming right up next. So don't forget to practice the quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day, all of you.